TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. A terror attack in the northern city of Haifa claims the life of one Israeli civilian alongside 4 additional casualties. Israel warns the Islamist Hamas that unless it releases additional hostages as part of the latest American outline, the war will reignite. Egypt is set to host an extraordinary summit of the Arab League to discuss an alternative plan to that of President Donald Trump to the day after the war in the Gaza Strip. A terror attack plagued Israel's northern city of Haifa this morning, during the course of which one Israeli regrettably was killed and 4 others sustained injuries. The terrorist, who was said to be an Israeli citizen, arrived at Haifa's Lev HaMifrat Central bus station at approximately 9:45 this morning. Immediately after the assailant exited the bus, he went on a stabbing spree, wounding 4 Israelis before a security guard and an armed civilian opened fire and neutralized the terrorist. According to a number of reports, a 60-year-old Israeli civilian was regrettably killed by either the security guard or the armed civilian's fire. However, police said they are investigating this reported allegation.
The attacker is a citizen of the State of Israel. As for what is being circulated on networks, that it seems that one of those injured was shot by those trying to neutralize the attacker, all these details are being inspected. We cannot confirm that at this moment. It is being investigated. Everything is sent for professional checks, and after getting the professional results, we will be able to give answers.
Shifting to the fragile state of affairs vis-a-vis the Gaza Strip, as the ceasefire between Israel and the Islamist Hamas terror organization is evidently on the verge of collapse. Speaking on the latest developments after Israel had agreed to a proposal by President Donald Trump's Mideast envoy, Steve Witkoff, Prime Minister Benjamin Nyantayahu reaffirmed Jerusalem's unyielding commitment to bring about the release of all of the 59 hostages who are in Hamas captivity to date.
Last night, I held a security discussion with the participation of the defense minister, the faction heads, senior security establishment officials, and the negotiating team. Upon the conclusion of the discussion, we decided on the following steps. Israel adopts the framework of President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, for a temporary ceasefire for the Ramadan and Passover period. We are fully coordinating with President Trump and his people. According to the information that Israel has, Hamas is currently holding 59 hostages, up to 24 are alive and at least 35 are deceased. We are not giving up on anyone, and we are determined to bring them all back home.
Prime Minister Netanyahu continued by explaining the American proposal, which would prolong the presiding cessation of hostilities between the IDF and the Islamist Hamas.
According to the Witkoff proposal, on the first day of his framework, half of the hostages will be released in one phase. At the end of the framework, if agreement is reached, the remaining hostages will be released, also in one phase. Steve Witkoff proposed the framework for extending the ceasefire after gaining the impression that there is no possibility, at present, of bridging between the two positions, Israel's and Hamas's, regarding the second stage, and that additional time for talks was necessary in order to achieve a possible agreement. He even defined his proposal as a corridor for negotiations on the second stage. Israel is ready for this.
Amid an uptick of allegations by Qatar and other state and non-state actors of Israeli violations to the hostage release deal, the Israeli Prime Minister underlined that Israel possesses written assurances from the United States that it can return to fight following the 42nd day of the original outline if it gains the impression that the negotiations with Hamas are essentially ineffective.
I would like to clarify, contrary to claims that I hear from analysts in the studios, Israel is not in violation while Hamas has repeatedly violated the agreement on the first stage. According to the original agreement, Israel can return to fighting after the 42nd day if it has gained the impression that the negotiations have been ineffective. This article is supported in a side letter of the previous U.S. administration and has also received the full backing and support of the Trump administration. But even so, we agreed to the Witkoff framework because we are committed to returning all of our hostages. While Israel has agreed to the Witkoff framework, Hamas has, so far, clung to its refusal and has not agreed to the framework. If Hamas changes its position, Israel will immediately enter into negotiations on implementing the framework.
As a first step to pressure Hamas to accept the American proposal for an extension to the ceasefire during the Ramadan and Passover holidays, Premier Netanyahu instructed the immediate halt of humanitarian aid from entering the Gaza Strip, stressing that there won't be any free meals.
There will be no free lunches. If Hamas thinks that it will be possible to continue the ceasefire or benefit from the terms of the first stage without us receiving hostages, it is sorely mistaken.
It is important to highlight that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to extend the first stage of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas by at least 1 week until U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff arrives in the region. Sources in Netanyahu's inner circle reportedly said he is considering renewing the fighting, but will wait to see whether the mediators are able to persuade Hamas to extend the first phase. Meanwhile, Israel has drafted plans to ratchet up pressure on Hamas in the course of this week. The plan, which has been named the Hell Plan, includes following up the decision to halt the delivery of humanitarian aid into Gaza, with displacing residents from the northern Gaza Strip to the south, halting the supply of electricity, and a resumption of full-scale fighting. And while prospects of Hamas agreeing to Witkoff's proposal remain elusive, Arab state actors are pushing for an Egyptian-led proposal for the so-called day after the war in the Gaza Strip that does not converge with U.S. President Donald Trump's own proposed plan. Yesterday, during a joint press conference with visiting EU Commissioner for the Mediterranean, Dubravka Suica, Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati stressed that his country's day-after plan awaits a ministerial approval, which was scheduled for today, and that a meeting of the Arab League Summit, which is scheduled for tomorrow, will aim to seek the approval of all Arab heads of state before publicizing its contents.
No one has seen the plan in detail, awaiting the ministerial meeting tomorrow and the summit next Tuesday. Therefore, the plan has been completed and is awaiting to be presented to our Arab brothers in the ministerial meeting and at the summit for its approval before we share it with any foreign party. We can't share the details of the plan with any party before the approval of the leaders and the presidents on March 4th. Regarding the second phase, as I mentioned, each party must implement their obligations. An agreement has been signed. This agreement must be implemented, and the agreement includes the full flow of aid. It cannot be accepted to use the aid as a weapon for collective punishment and starvation. This is completely unacceptable and represents a blatant and flagrant violation of international humanitarian law.
It is important to know that the latter allegations of a supposed flagrant violation of international humanitarian law is categorically false and seemingly taken out of proportion. Israel's decision to abruptly end the flow of humanitarian aid into the Hamas-controlled territory, which remains a war zone, does not converge with obligations under the laws of armed conflict. The laws of armed conflict naturally prohibit the starvation of enemy civilians as a means of warfare, which includes the explicit denial of food and water. To the extent that preventing food and water supply from enemy fighters will harm the civilian population, however, the harm must be proportionate, ensuring that no extensive damage is caused to civilians, compared to the military advantage of the military operation. This is also the position of the majority of Western states, including the United States of America, as specified in the Laws of War Manual of the U.S. Defense Department. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary General Antonio Guterres announced over the weekend that he will join the extraordinary summit of the League of Arab States to discuss the reconstruction of Gaza, while further stressing his own perspective vis-à-vis the Palestinian conflict with Israel.
Both Gaza and the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, must be treated as one, politically, economically, and administratively, and governed by a Palestinian government that is accepted and supported by the Palestinian people. There must be a clear political framework that lays the groundwork for Gaza's recovery, reconstruction, and lasting stability. And this framework must be based on clear principles. This means staying true to the bedrock of international law. It means preventing any form of ethnic cleansing. It means there should be no long-term Israeli military presence in Gaza. It seems address Israel's legitimate security concerns. It means accountability for violations of international law. And it means Gaza remains an integral part of an independent, democratic, and sovereign Palestinian state with no reductions in its territory or forced transfer of its population.
Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News. TV7 Israel is a non-profit ministry with all of our productions exclusively reliant on your generosity. Therefore, if you're blessed by the content of our programs, I would like to encourage you to support TV7 Israel. You can donate via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Separately, I'd like to also encourage you to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and salvation of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hassan wishing you a Shavua Mevorach, and God willing, we will see you during our next updates. Until then, Shalom from Jerusalem.